So thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people in this room. It feels so wonderful to actually be able to have a live in-person forum after so long of not being able to do events like this. We're really grateful tonight that Easthampton Media, which is now switching to eMedia, they're broadcasting this live. They're also going to have a recording up on their website until the September 6th primary. So if you're watching at home or if you have friends who didn't get to come, please let folks know that that's happening. And thanks to Easthampton Media for their collaboration in this event. So I'm Jackie Brousseau-Pereira, and I'm the current chair of the Easthampton Democratic City Committee. I'm really pleased to be able to moderate this forum tonight. I'm really excited to hear from all of the candidates for Hampshire County Sheriff. I want to talk a little bit about rules for tonight as we move along. Our vice chair, Evan LeBeau, is in the front row with his fabulous working dog that he's training. Evan's our timekeeper tonight, so I'm going to ask, as the candidates are speaking, to just pay attention to Evan in the front row. He's going to give you the 1 minute, 30-second and stop sign. We have quite a few questions, and we want to make sure everyone has their time, so please pay attention to the timekeeping and be respectful of each other. I'm not worried about that because I know that you're all respectful. The candidates are all here. As you can see, what we did at the beginning before we started was I asked each candidate to pick a number from my hand on a piece of paper so we could determine the order in which folks were going to start off. And so Sheriff Patrick Kaling will give his first remarks. I'm going to do the logistics. That word is hard today. The logistics first, and then we'll have you give your remarks. So Sheriff Kaling will go first. Yvonne Gittleson is going third. Caitlin Cepeda is going second. You're in that order on my sheet. So each of the candidates will give an set of opening remarks for 4 minutes. And then we have a series of questions that were submitted ahead of time from members of the community, and we also actually asked the candidates to each submit some questions. So we took all the questions that were submitted, and we have a set of questions that the Easthampton Democratic Committee, Executive Committee actually built over the last couple of days. So those are the questions we'll be going with. We are scheduled to end at 9, so we want everyone to be kind of, again, respectful of time. We may not get to all the questions. We'll see how it goes. If it turns out that something comes up in the conversation and you feel like we haven't built in any responses, we've really just built this as a forum, but if something comes up that you feel you need to address, please ask, and we'll see if we have the ability to add a couple minutes in case someone needs to do a response to something that comes up. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Unless there's any reason why we shouldn't, let's just get started. So again, each candidate gets 4 minutes to do an opening statement. Sheriff Kaling, you get to go first. The things we're thinking about here are kind of what do you bring to this position? Why is it important for you? Take it away.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to the Easthampton Democrats for allowing us to speak. I'm Sheriff Patrick Kaling. I'm a 64-year-old Irish immigrant who lives in Hampshire County and have lived here since I was 10 years old. I care deeply about this community that welcomed me as a child and helped me expand my roots. I'm a trained, educated, and a certified jail manager and a criminal justice professional. I've worked my entire career to the service of citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, starting as a member of the Army National Guard up to my present position as the Sheriff of Hampshire County. I've held positions within the criminal justice system as an educator, an auditor, a compliance manager, and several positions within the department managing staffs at every level. Currently, I oversee the entire Hampshire County Sheriff's Department, which has 7 divisions. In my current role, I am responsible for implementing legislative mandates of criminal justice reform and fulfilling audit requirements for the 9 agencies that oversee all of our work. These audits ensure safety for everybody in the community. We continue to pass these audits successfully. I am the only candidate who has this level of expertise. As your sheriff, I'm responsible for making tough calls that protect the lives and the safety of all individuals who interact with us. This job requires a multidimensional skill set, which I have developed over the many years with the department, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. It doesn't take time off. Not all of those are great days, but most of them are good days, and the good outweigh the bad. This is why I want to continue to work, doing the work as the sheriff. I want to continue to make sure that our community has the opportunity to have more good days than bad days. I want to tell you a few things that have happened over the last 5 years. During COVID, we had to develop a makeshift courthouse to operate inside the facility to allow justice process to continue while everything was closed down. I continued to work with the Legislative Commission to ensure the health and safety of the LGBTQI community that is incarcerated throughout Massachusetts. I remodeled one half of the facility to meet today's living and learning standards. I installed new air circulation systems in the main facility to better serve those individuals who are living there. I established a medication-assisted treatment program that is licensed by the Mass Department of Public Health. And I've established our own opioid treatment center, licensed by the DEA and the U.S. Department of Health. This is only the second one in the state. Established a home for 16 parolees called the Rocky Hill Reentry Collaborative. I built up a positive treatment model by combining education and treatment into one cohesive unit under one professionally trained educator who has an excellent record in managing people. I purchased heavy-duty tablets for the inmates at no cost to the Commonwealth. I increased the level of education and training for many of the staff under the leadership of a new staff development director who has a college background behind her. Maintained a transparent relationship with the media and our legislative delegation, providing over 80 status updates from March of 2020 to the present day. You can find those on our webpage. Continued with the legislature, I in fact reduced to zero the amount of money that each city and town has to pay to the regional police lockup. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Caitlin Cepeda, would you like to go next? Sure.
My name is Caitlin Cepeda. I'm a registered nurse. I have been for nearly a dozen years, almost 10 of them, the Hampshire County Sheriff's Office from 2012 under the former Sheriff Garvey until just this past October. I have been a lifelong member of Hampshire County, born and raised in Ware, reside in South Hadley with my family, with my husband and my children. Went to UMass for my graduate and nursing degree while I lived in Pelham and served on the Conservation Commission there. I've been involved with a number of programs at the Hampshire County Sheriff's Office since my employment began there. I was instrumental in the MAT program, the MOUD program that Sheriff Kaylane spoke about, on the ground floor of writing the initial grant of that. I was the medical liaison to that program for a number of years. I designed and developed the data processing and record keeping software program for that department or for that program. And gave weekly meetings and updates to all treatment staff involved with that program for a number of years. I sat on the Institutional Review Board for 2 years as well, and am well versed in every aspect of the facility on the ground level. I am the only staff member running right now that is a day-to-day working staff member. I continue to do that. The face-to-face work with justice-involved individuals, the face-to-face work with staff, who are instrumental in carrying out all of the plans and procedures and policies of the facility. And I and colleagues like me on the front lines are the ones who are directly impacted most by the Criminal Justice Reform Act policies that we're seeing and changes that we're seeing, along with the individuals in our care who we supervise and provide care to.
Thank you. All set? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yvonne Gittleson, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Jackie, and the Easthampton Democratic Town Committee for hosting the first of the live debates that we are all looking forward to. And Jackie, I noticed that in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, you made a really great quote in which you said you thought that folks in both Easthampton and in Hampshire County generally wanted to know what are the conditions like for inmates and staff Are both of those sets of stakeholders feeling safe, listened to, feeling like their needs are being met? And I would add a third stakeholder, and that's the citizens and voters of Hampshire County, who also need to be heard and feel like their needs are being met as well. So who am I and why am I running? I'm Yvonne Gittleson. I have chosen Hampshire County as my home, where I've lived for the last 30 years. Hampshire County is a wonderful, beautiful place, and I love it because it's education forward, and I'm the education candidate. I'm a lifelong educator. I'm also an entrepreneur. I've got varied experiences that give me a vision for innovation and creative problem solving. While I was at the Hampshire County Jail, I was the education program coordinator, where I designed, created, and implemented a variety of programs, including adult basic education, vocational education and training, college courses for those inmates who are eligible. I am a 100% successful competitive grant writer, not just entitlement grants, but competitive grants, who brought hundreds of thousands of dollars into the Hampshire County Jail. Now I am the Massachusetts Corrections Program Specialist for the state. And in that role, I oversee all the county houses, the state prisons, and DYS facilities and their education programs. And I oversee them for administrative compliance, fiscal compliance, program compliance, and whether or not they're doing a good job educationally. I'm running because I saw the Hampshire County Jail from the inside, and I know, having seen all the other facilities around the state, I know that we in Hampshire County can do a lot better. I couldn't stand by, and in 2016, I voted for Mr. Kaline, and I voted for him because I thought he had the most experience compared to the other candidates. And in 2022, I'm taking my vote back. I know that education has been proven to reduce recidivism. It's the only thing that has been proven to reduce recidivism. As the educator among the candidates, I know that I am eminently qualified to make the Hampshire County Jail an education-forward facility. And in fact, my goal is to make it the flagship educational correctional facility for all of Massachusetts. What I will do as sheriff is I will restore and improve staff recruitment, retention, and the esprit de corps that is so lacking. And I'll do that through communication and respect. I'll restore and expand all educational, vocational, mental health treatment grant funding wherever possible. I'll work to increase the Hampshire County's budget allocation from Boston. I can tell you that a woman sheriff will get a lot of attention in Boston, especially with a woman governor. I will publish all the budgets and expenditures on our own website, plus the see-through system. I'll be visible and available throughout the facility every single day. I'll upgrade the technology. I'll have a transparent system of promotion based on demonstrated performance outcomes. I will invite SEIU or another union of our choice to organize the non-security staff within the facility. I will meet regularly with each department and not just senior staff for open communication. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you, all three of you, so much for those remarks. I have a series of questions that I will go through that the candidates have not seen yet, so they haven't had a chance to prepare them. What I've done is kind of gone ahead and randomized who's going to answer first throughout these questions. The first question I'm going to start again. I know you got to finish, Yvonne, but now you get to start again. So the first question to our candidates is, many people don't understand the role of county sheriff in the state of Massachusetts. So how do you define the office, and who do you consider to be its main stakeholders? What do you believe are the concerns of these stakeholders, and how do you intend to address them? And I realize that some of these issues might have already come up in people's remarks, but we're going to have all the candidates answer all the questions. And I can repeat any of that at any point if anyone needs me to do that.
One more time might be good.
Yep. So many people don't understand the role of county sheriffs in Massachusetts. How do you define the office? Who do you consider to be its main stakeholders? What do you believe are the concerns of these stakeholders, and how do you intend to address them? You have the floor whenever you're ready.
Great. Okay, so I define the role of county sheriff in Massachusetts. It's quite different than in other states. In Massachusetts, it's primarily an administrative and governmental position in which it's really about running the various offices that comprise the sheriff's office and addressing the needs of the community, the various communities. And when I consider the stakeholders, I do consider those in custody. I consider certainly the staff that works with those in custody, but first and foremost, I consider the general community as our primary stakeholders. And I think that there hasn't been enough communication, enough transparency, and enough accountability between the sheriff's office in Hampshire County and the communities that they serve. So my goal is to open that up. I want to pull back the curtains. I want to publish all the budgets, not just the state budget and what the sheriff spends on state allocations, but what about inmate benefits? I want to learn more about that, and I think that the community wants to hear more about that, where that money comes from, what that money gets spent on, whether or not. I can tell you that presently inmates do not have a say in how that money is spent. I also care about outside sources of income, such as grant funding, which I'm quite experienced in bringing into a facility. I also care about funds like the Deputy Sheriff's Association and where that money goes and what that money is spent on. I'd like to see it spent on scholarships throughout the communities in Hampshire County. And I'd like to see that dispersed back through the county. So when I think of the role of sheriff, I think of the role of sheriff as a caretaker. It's the primary governmental person who is responsible. Yes, it's law enforcement, but this is not Texas. This is not Georgia. This is not Roscoe P. Coltrane. Nobody's gonna strap on a holster and go around and arrest people in the communities. That's not what this job is. What the Massachusetts legislature has told us is that they want corrections to evolve in a direction of education, first and foremost, treatment, mental health services, and a program-focused perspective, not simply a warehousing or custodial perspective, which is really the old style of what corrections used to be about. And so as we think about these programs, we need to think outside the box. Because of criminal justice reform, sentences are shorter than ever before. It also means that folks who are getting incarcerated are very serious offenders. So they're very serious offenders, yet they're with us for shorter periods of time, just like in public education. Every teacher knows this. Every year you do more with less. That's how it goes. And so that's what we have to do in corrections also. And what I know is when it comes to questions like safety inside a facility, I know that busy folks in custody don't cause problems. People who are involved in programs throughout the day, people who are working toward their future, don't cause problems. And so through education programs, through treatment programs, among the mental health changes I want to bring one-to-one counseling and therapy to the facility, not group settings without a focused curriculum, without evidence-based outcomes, where, to be perfectly honest, convicted offenders don't want to share their deepest, darkest secrets with one another when they're sitting in a room together. They need one-to-one proven therapy, whether that's CBT, DBT, maybe even EMDR, or let's rely on good old-fashioned talk therapy. But that's what we need.
Thank you. Caitlin, I'm going to ask you to take that question next. Let me know if you need me to repeat any of it.
No, I think I'm okay. So the role of sheriff, as I define it, is an arm of public safety. Our primary concern as sheriff in this county, like Yvonne was saying, we're not the South where things are run a little bit differently. In this county, it's primarily the safe and orderly running of the facility and all of its aspects. And within that, the stakeholders in that are the incarcerated population, the staff, and then lastly, the community. Our primary goal as sheriff and in a correctional setting is to make better the people who are incarcerated with us, whether that's pretrial or sentenced, as they enter back into their communities. Largely this community, though at Hampshire County where the population is approximately 50% outside of this community, a nearby community potentially. What we're talking about in terms of what I think their concerns are, What we are seeing on the front lines of correction over the last 5 or 6 years, exponentially more than anything else, is substance abuse and mental health issues. And those happening together, a co-occurring disorder, when you have both of those things happening together. In the general population, that happens about 9% of the time. In correctional facilities like Hampshire County, we're looking at about 47% of the time. That's where the focus needs to be. You will be unable to reach people for any kind of extra help, extra educational, extra anything until you get them to a place in their substance abuse recovery where they are physically able to accept that help and that treatment. You cannot, if any of you is nurse, if any of you has worked with substance abuse offenders or anything like that, you cannot reach people while they are in the throes of detox. You cannot reach people while they are in the throes of that addiction. And for some people who are longtime heavy users, depending upon the drug, that can take well more than 30 days. For a lot of our pretrial offenders, we don't even have them that long. So for our stakeholder that is the incarcerated individual, that first and primary concern needs to be addressing our substance abuse issues. That happened really, really well when the facility became an OTP, an opiate treatment program. That can be extended through streamlining of that program. That's grant funded largely. It can be streamlined where we're able to offer more services to more people because we've coalesced the work and we've made it easier to get to the staff that provides the work. The second part of that is the mental health treatment. Approximately 50% of the population, according to the correctional funding report published earlier this year, has a diagnosed mental health disorder, a serious mental health disorder. If you ask the individuals themselves, it's closer to 70%. And a lot of them don't meet the criteria for an official diagnosis and are therefore self-medicating with substances, which is where we get our kind of crossroads of the co-occurring disorders. What the facility now needs to do is expand its mental health services. The facility contracts out its mental health services now. There is not a mental health facility presently at the Hampshire County Jail. What that contract allows us to have is a clinical provider, psychiatrist, every other week, and it allows us a unlicensed forensic clinician. We need to expand on that and expand the program internally so that we have licensed staff providing more treatment to the individuals in our care. The staff need help. We are at a staffing crisis. There needs to be recruitment, training, and we need to deal with all of that so that the overtime is decreased, which blowing our budget. We are already spending more in overtime than we did for the entirety of last year, and we're halfway through this year annually. Our staff want to be able to have time off. They want to be able to have opportunities for career advancement. There's presently very little lateral motion available to our security staff and nearly none in the other departments. And then finally, our stakeholders in the community. They need to be educated about what we do. They need to be invested in what we do so that they want to come back and invest in our facility in terms of volunteer opportunities, partnerships with local businesses and entrepreneurs for the individuals in our care as we open up and expand again our work release program, which was largely shut down during COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to you, Patrick.
If you wouldn't mind repeating the question,
bet.
because I think we went to many different places. So
Okay. So the question is, I read it the first time. Many people don't understand the role of county sheriff in Massachusetts. How do you define the office? Who do you consider to be the main stakeholders? And what do you believe are the concerns of these stakeholders, and how do you intend to address them?
Okay. First off, this is an office that is an elected position for the county, but we operate under state mandates, not just county mandates. And the legislature is one of the stakeholders. The governor's administrative offices is a second stakeholder. The Hampshire County citizens are a stakeholder. The inmates are a stakeholder. The courts are a stakeholder. And the average citizen who needs our services beyond the jail and house of correction are stakeholders. I had said earlier, there are 7 different divisions in this department. All of those divisions have stakeholders, whether it's the senior citizens who work with us through our triad program, or the inmates who are in our Bridge to the Future program, or the legal community, or the average citizen who has to deal with the civil process office. The regional police lockup, all of the police departments in Hampshire County are stakeholders in what we do as a full Hampshire County Sheriff's operation. It's not just a jail and house of correction. And the stakeholders, as we talk about the jail and house of correction, it is not just the staff and the inmates, but it's anybody who comes in contact with the system. Because the system itself is designed to have outside people involved in day-to-day functioning of corrections in Massachusetts. So people come in contact with this system sometimes because they know somebody in the community that is an individual who is incarcerated, and in many of those cases, we will, in those situations, help that citizen understand what the role of corrections is. Those phone calls come to my office on a regular basis. My cousin is incarcerated, or they may not even be incarcerated in our system, but those are stakeholders in our community because they're part of the citizenry. And you could check with anyone who has ever called that we have tried to help them in any way. The idea behind the department is that each division will give that kind of service to the general public because that's what our responsibility is. As far as the inmates individually, they are stakeholders because we give them opportunities to move forward within the system. They can step down through a series of programs, end up back in the community, whether it be on an electronic monitor program through our Bridge to the Future House, back working in the community where we have many local employers who we view also as stakeholders because they work with the system to get people back into an employment situation. And we have very loyal employers who will come back time and time and ask if they can help. And that's where we create the work that generates the goodwill of the community and allow the inmate population to move forward so that they can safely come back to the community. And then you have the other group is the wraparound services outside in the community that we provide and that we connect with so that the individual inmate, when they're leaving us or when they're close to leaving us, can in fact get services in the community through all of those different groups that we work with on a daily basis. It's not a one-dimensional program, it cannot function as a one-dimensional program as being suggested.
Thank you. Our next question, I'm going to ask Ms. Cepeda to start, and then Sheriff Kaling, and then Ms. Gittleson. So here's the question. From your perspective, and again, some of these might seem repetitive, but we're going to give everyone a chance to answer everything. From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges facing the Hampshire County Sheriff's Office and the Hampshire County House of Corrections right now, and how do you plan to address these?
I think primarily the biggest challenge facing the jail and house of corrections right now is staffing. We, along with every other correctional facility in the state and a lot of law enforcement agencies, are facing a staffing crisis. There aren't enough qualified applicants for the job openings that we have. Those that we do get in aren't necessarily seasoned in any kind of way, and with the other opportunities that exist in law enforcement now, particularly since the post-commission has come about, there are so many other law enforcement opportunities for people who are well-seasoned in criminal justice, who are well-seasoned in law enforcement. There used to be a time, closer to even when I started working in criminal justice and in corrections, where a lot of graduates out of the wonderful universities we have around here in criminal justice and sociology and social work came to corrections as kind of a stepping stone to get their feet wet in corrections and in community law enforcement, and used that as kind of a way to get into a different law enforcement agency, whether that's the state police or a local police department or something else. Now, with the opportunities that exist and the lack of people applying in general, folks are bypassing the correctional system entirely. So we're not even getting those feeders out of the university for people just looking to get experience and getting their feet wet. There are just not the applicants. And in turn, what that creates internally for the staff is staffing that are overburdened and overworked. The staff that are there are asking, like Ms. Gittleson said, to do more with less every day. The roles of the correctional facility, the roles of the correctional staff, and treatment staff and medical too, for that matter, is expanding every day. The hats that they're required to wear grow, heavier and multiply every day, and we're not offering them as much opportunity as there once was for help. That's blowing our overtime budget. We're already past what we spent last year. It's overburdening and overworking our staff such that the environment within the facility for those who are incarcerated becomes less safe. There is more overworked staff. The staff that are there are tired, maybe working on their second, overtime that day, and it's difficult to be giving your all as a staff member to your job when that's what you're facing in terms of your work environment. It's difficult for you to want to be that fantastic role model to the individuals that you're caring for, to really give your all that these guys who are employed really, really want to be doing. And the women in the medical department and all of the, folks in the treatment staff, same kind of thing. They want to be giving more, but it's difficult with the lack of staffing there. That's a primary concern. Past that, technology upgrades. We are an antiquated facility and we're not making an effort to be more technologically advanced. We still use typewriters to keep records. There's no reason for that. They sit next to computers in every single instance. It's a matter of taking the initiative and starting to use that technology. What we can make up for a little bit in our lack of staffing is the use of technology, where we start working smarter and not harder. It's important for us to get on the bandwagon for that so that the staff that we do have can be spending less time on the administrative paperwork and the secretarial work, and they can get back to the work of care and custody and be out and amongst the individuals that we're caring for and doing that work, doing that talking, doing that therapy, doing that time with them. If we installed Wi-Fi, we could take our tablets and we could go elsewhere and we could do programming at different places. We could have meetings and assessments in different places, and it wouldn't be tied to such a tight schedule. It would open us up for opportunities for more treatment options and more time, more face time with the individual. That's what we need to start getting back to. Less menial tasks, more meaningful tasks.
Thank you. Sheriff Kaling?
I would say that staffing is a concern in every facility in Massachusetts. It's also a concern at every police department in Massachusetts and probably across the country at this point in time. But it's not just the staffing in criminal justice agencies, it's staffing in every agency that you come in contact with. And we have these discussions quite often regarding staffing. And since the beginning of the year, we have had over 300 applications for employment, and we have recruited 15 people from those applications. We screen out people for different reasons, obviously. That is only one piece of a puzzle, and we have to continue to look at how we evolve corrections. Our staffing is higher as far as the inmate to staff ratio, and we have changed the dynamic. And we actually, the sheriffs across the Commonwealth, worked with the legislative branch to change how they interpret staffing, how they interpret how our budgets are set as far as staffing is concerned in this past budget year, because they understand it also that not every facility is designed the same. Some facilities have changed since they were first designed, ours included. We've reworked the inside of the structure so that 2 of the housing units are better formatted to getting better control by the staff, and to be able to make them treatment units. So that's one piece. One of the other things is IT infrastructure. Oddly enough, and I'm glad it was brought up, because in this past budget year, we have, in fact, spent a lot of money on IT infrastructure for the purposes of being able to prepare the staff for training and prepare the inmates for educational purposes. And so we've spent almost $100,000 in infrastructure money in this past budget year. Those are things that not everybody would know unless you were looking at our budgets. Some of the other pieces that we have to look at is what happened during COVID. COVID kicked the heck out of an awful lot of people, probably including many of the people in this room. Our staff had to come to work. And I'm proud of the staff that came to work every day, because you know what? The staff that came to work and they worked day in, day out through COVID, that staff needs to be rewarded. And we did some of the rewarding that was given out as far as state money to supplement what they were already getting. It's not an endless pot that we can continue to go back to when you're dealing with employment and rewarding everybody. I would love to give everybody bigger raises, but the reality is that's not always the case, because it is state funded, and the State Office of Administration and Finance are the people who calls the shots as far as what the level of payments are and what the pay raise system would be. And that is something that we don't have control over.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes. Well, I think we're in agreement on one thing. Staffing is the problem at the Hampshire County Jail. And clearly the numbers of staffing and the staffing shortages are consistently a problem. And yes, they are a problem throughout the state. However, they are particularly a problem at the Hampshire County Jail. And overwhelmingly, what we hear is that this staff is overworked, specifically the security staff, who are forced into mandatory overtime because that's part of their contract. They don't have a choice. If someone calls out sick, they are held over, and they must, by the terms of their contract, fulfill that mandatory overtime. That's a fast recipe for burnout in a hurry. And when someone can't put in for getting their child's birthday off 2 months in advance, and they have no choice except to call out sick, that's a quick way to really bring the morale of the facility down and down and down. And it's not just the security staff that's pretty unhappy, but it's other staff as well that feel like they're not heard. They're not included. They're not considered when it comes to major decisions that are made at the highest levels of administration within the facility. And the lack of general vision, the lack of leadership, the lack of mission has really been a problem since this particular administration. And many people will tell you that there was simply not a clear direction as to where this administration wanted to go. So we agree that staffing is the problem. And I would agree with another challenger here, Ms. Cepeda, when she says we need to work smarter and not harder, right? There are ways to reward employees that don't come down to money. This isn't just about money. People want to be heard. People want to be seen. People want to be spoken to and communicated with. And they want their ideas taken seriously. And when it comes to front lines work, when the average officer is never considered in terms of his or her ideas, and those ideas are never brought to serious consideration, then there's not much reason to want to keep showing up when you feel like you're saying the same things over and over again and they're never being heard. You're never seeing the results of your efforts. So we agree that staffing is the problem. So how do we fix that? We do need to recruit differently. We need to think differently about who our officers can be. And that's really where the key staffing shortage is, because the other staffing shortages, it's also very, very difficult in nursing, in medical. It's difficult to find qualified and licensed counselors who can do the work that we're looking to have them do as well. But we need to find other ways. Technology is definitely a way that we can meet many of these challenges. One approach with regard to counseling and therapy is telehealth. And if we have the technology, and with regard to education, we can certainly use virtual and online classes to meet many, many needs. So we've learned a lot with COVID. And in fact, there have been a number of different silver linings with COVID. And when we speak to different folks who've been in custody at different times, they'll tell us that the tablets or an online program made the difference for them in their recovery or in their education. So we do agree that staffing is the issue. We might have some disagreement on how to address it.
Thank you. For our next question, I'm going to ask Sheriff Kaling to answer first, then Ms. Gittleson, and then Ms. Cepeda. And the question is, please discuss the demographics of the individuals who are incarcerated at the jail and the current demographics of the staff. And from your perspective, does this have any effect on how the incarcerated folks are treated? How would you describe your ideal staffing situation in relation to demographics and existing staff and challenges?
Well, there's several pieces to this, and first off, you have to look at what Hampshire County is, and Hampshire County is a county that is predominantly a white community. There is roughly 13% of the whole county that would be considered anything but a white community. So when you look at a jail population or a house of correction population, you have to look at that a little differently. Where did the people come from? Many of our people that are arrested in Hampshire County happen to come from outside of our county, and they tend to be minorities. And we have, I believe the statistics right now are 20% considered of African heritage. The problem with the percentages in the Hispanic population is that many times they're classified when they're coming in as classified as white. And so that statistic can be skewed in somewhat. But we have a smaller percent, we have a relatively probably 20 to 25% Hispanic, and the other half of the population tends to be white. But you can't confuse that with what does the community look like here, because we don't look like the population that is in our custody. We also take inmates in from the State Department of Corrections, and we also take inmates in from other counties, and that can skew the minority populations as well. The staff is one-third of the staff are treatment-based staff, whether it be medical and or mental health, substance abuse, and clinicians of those type of people. So one-third is a treatment-based staff. Of that, probably, and I would be guessing on this, maybe 10% are minority staff. But there's most of that staff are women, and in many of those situations, we find that women work better with individuals when they because they don't create the same threat as a male when they're working with the male inmate. So there's a balance in all of this. So we try to recruit the best staff, not looking at it from what their heritage is. We try to make sure that they have a background in whatever field that we're looking for. And we don't, and on the correctional officer side, we look at who are the best candidates that are out there. So it may look different than what the population looks like, but we try to balance it as best we can.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Gittleson, do you want me to repeat the question, or do you feel?
I think I got it. You asked about the demographics of the staff and the demographics of those in custody. And I'm not sure that there was a binding question between those, but what would we do to address that, or?
How does it work?
How does it work? All right, that's a good way to put it. All right, so the demographics of the staff are overwhelmingly white. The demographics of those in custody are still predominantly white. However, the non-white populations are disproportionately represented in the persons in custody. And I think in listening to Mr. Kaling's description of this, I think we have a pretty clear idea of why there's some difficulty and some disconnect between staffing and those in custody. So for those of us who are a little more well-versed in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know that we don't use the word minority anymore, right? So we use words like BIPOC, terms like BIPOC, which stand for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. We do talk about LGBTQIA+, and we talk about persons and then their ethnicity, right? Not a group name, for example. So how do we find more folks? How do we find more staff who represent and look like those in custody? Yes, we do have more folks who are non-white who come most usually, in our case, from Hampden County. And there we have folks who are Latinx, and there are a variety of terms that they prefer to use. Mostly, they prefer to be called by whatever it is that their actual ethnicity is, whether they're Puerto Rican or Dominican or whatever. So it might be Latinx, might be Hispanic, but it might be particular to their own ethnicity. We do need more women in corrections. I am glad that that issue came up, because very recently I spoke with a formerly incarcerated individual, and he said, we absolutely need a woman sheriff. We need someone who is both nurturing and yet no nonsense. And we need women because in these roles, because specifically in security officers' roles, correctional officers' roles, we need women in those positions because it does de-escalate and bring down the level of tension very often. So I think we're overlooking a very rich area of population that we can begin to recruit and look for a very different model of correctional officer, like the correctional case manager, for example, that model of officer. So we do need, we need way more training for our staff. I very recently went through a 5-month series on anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I can tell you it was entirely absent during my 4.5 years at the Hampshire County Jail. And so the fact that we haven't addressed that in corrections, and it's system-wide, but it's particularly an issue at the Hampshire County Jail, the fact that we haven't addressed that there is a glaring problem, specifically for Hampshire County, where we care a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And by focusing on education, which prioritizes this issue, the issue of access and equity, the fact that there are so many people sitting, especially in the pretrial portion of the facility, who are not getting services, those people are not being well served. And we need to address issues of demographics and how our staff meets the needs of those in custody. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cepeda?
I think kind of the linking piece to that question was, what is the ideal demographic? I don't disagree with either of the other candidates about what the breakdown is. It is largely a white staff, overwhelmingly so, and barely so on the incarcerated individual side. So while the staff accurately represents the county in which we live, they do not accurately represent the demographics of the population which we serve inside of the correctional facility. So ideally what the demographics would look for me is a staff that more closely represents that demographic, or at least has some sort of background with that demographic, someone with more of a lived experience. We have very few staff who actually have a lived experience with corrections, with substance abuse, with mental health, with any of that. It would be great to find people who had that lived experience Where do you find them? You start reaching out more into the community. This is where the community outreach portion comes, and this is where you start doing the community discussions, where you start talking to groups at colleges, at high schools, out into the community, where you start recruiting people who have that type of experience, where corrections might be a place for you. And yes, while having a female presence in the facility in general acts as a de-escalation tool, having folks that understand what the individuals in a correctional facility are going through works as that same de-escalation model. They understand what the individuals who are incarcerated are going through. They've lived the experience. They know. It's speaking to them in their language in a lot of cases, in a native language, if you will. And that acts as that same de-escalation tool. While I think that having more women in corrections is a really, really great thing, I think what we need to have more in corrections is a younger group of people working. People who have more experience with technology, who are still ambitious and hungry, who want to take this job and make it their own and advance it. That doesn't necessarily have to be divorced from people who have experience. Those two things can happen hand in hand. But having folks recruited into the facility who have an open mind, who are younger, fresh of ideas, fresh with ambition and innovation, than having somebody at the helm who's willing to listen to all of that makes for a very interesting model for success, I think.
Thank you. Okay, so for our next question, we are going to start with Ms. Gittleson, and then to Sheriff Kaling, and then to Ms. Cepeda. So as we were doing research for these questions, we had heard that individuals who are held for pretrial hearings make up a significant portion of the population at the Hampshire County House of Corrections, and they can sometimes be held for months or longer before having their trial. So what programs are in place to support these individuals and their families while they're incarcerated in this way, and what kinds of programs or services would you like to implement?
Okay, thank you. So at the Hampshire County Jail, as is typical of most of the county facilities around the state, the breakdown is approximately 70%, give or take, and it can vary county by county, approximately 70% in the pretrial division and about 30% on the sentenced side. So in pretrial, and the law specifically states that with regard to things like education, that what the Mass General Law actually says is those sentenced to 6 months or longer are entitled to education services. And they're entitled to ESL, they're entitled to literacy instruction, they're entitled to preparation for high school equivalency, for example. And what that also means, conversely, is that folks in pretrial are not entitled by law. So they're not guaranteed. And it's a tricky, sort of slippery slope sometimes, because they're also not convicted of anything. They are innocent until proven guilty, right? They're awaiting trial. So 70% of the population is sitting on the pretrial side. They're not by law entitled to services. According to the spirit of the law, as I see it, they should still be getting services, because many of them do spend time for extended periods of time on the pretrial side. They can spend months. They can spend years. For me, the worst example of this was an individual who was on the pretrial side when I arrived in 2017. And he asked to join the education program, and he was denied. He was not allowed. His charges were serious. He was not allowed to come off the unit. And I asked many times to be able to go serve him and others in that unit. And that idea was never met with any kind of fruition, unfortunately. He asked, he asked, he asked. He wanted to come to school. He wanted to work on his high school equivalency. He never got it. When I left in 2021, he was still there. He had never gotten his high school equivalency. That was over 4.5 years later. What that meant was when he went in front of a judge and he was eventually sentenced. When he went in front of that judge, he was not able to say to that judge, "Judge, I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing, waiting for my trial. I actually got my high school equivalency." And what that might have resulted in is that judge giving that person a very different sentence. So that's how that could have translated to that particular individual. Furthermore, by not having his high school equivalency, he wasn't able to have his attorney argue for a better placement in the state system. Right? He wasn't able to argue for a placement in Gardner as opposed to maybe he landed in Sousa Baranowski. I don't know. But that's not a great place to land. And there are better options within the state system for education programming. So he lost out twice. He probably lost out in time off his sentence that he never got, and he never got to explain to a judge. And he probably lost out in the option of where he was able to be sent. So would I open up the pretrial side to all services? I sure would. I sure would. It wouldn't be difficult. The Hampshire County Jail is divided, and especially on the pretrial side, in a lot of small housing pods. We could collect pretrial individuals who want to get education services or who want to focus on substance abuse treatment primarily, or their mental health counseling. We could collect them in pod by pod by pod and get them those focused services while they are waiting for trial. My understanding is that there are approximately a dozen, maybe 15 or so individuals right now who are over the 2-year mark on the pretrial side. That's a long time. It's a long time to go without services. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheriff Kaline?
Well, I probably want to correct a few misunderstandings that might have happened in all of this. One is there's a classification system in place. There has to be a classification system in place. Otherwise, we cannot keep our staff safe, and we cannot keep the other inmates safe. And this is what both of these candidates have talked about, is the staff safety and inmate safety. And so when we talk about how we interpret what a classification system is, we have to make sure that the classification board absorbs as much information about that individual as possible. Now, I don't know who the individual is that she's referring to, but from everything she has described, my assumption is that the seriousness of the charge prevented that individual from being moved from point A to point B, and that individual was probably looking to get to a classroom situation where we don't know that the goal isn't to escape from the facility. There has to be some balance in all of this. And one of the other misinterpretations is that we're housing these people for long, long periods of time. We're not. The average length of stay for a pretrial individual is roughly 27 days when you start looking at the overall population. 27 days. So let me tell you what happens, because I started out as a correctional officer. I know what it's like to be a correctional officer and work in housing units and work with a population that can be very volatile at times. And so when I look at these situations, I have to trust that the classification system works right and the classification board is making the right decisions for the safety of everybody that's inside the correctional facility. So in those 27 days, an individual has to be assessed from a medical, mental health, and treatment standpoint. And by the time they get to a point where we're ready to make them or put them into some sort of a treatment program, and by the way, we do have treatment programs for pretrial inmates. Contrary to what's being said, we do have pretrial programs for the inmate population that is in the pretrial status. As a matter of fact, one of the units that I worked through COVID to get back on track was our modular building, and in that building, we have pretrial individuals that are housed that actually can work in the facility and can go to programs. And they can go to educational programs as well as any other program that they so choose. But they are classified for that purpose because I am not going to run the risk of having staff get seriously injured or killed by somebody who is thinking that if I manipulate a staff member to get to a point that they end up in a classroom, that they try to find a way to escape. Now, I've been there a long time. I've seen how escapes happen, and I've experienced them. As a matter of fact, there's a friend in the room that was on the shift with me one night when an escape attempt was discovered, and without his expertise and knowledge, we may have had somebody get hurt that night. And so there's a balance in all of this, and you have to understand that the balance has to take place for everybody's safety. But we will continue to do treatment and programming for all of our population as long as they meet the criteria that we need.
Thank you. Ms. Cepeda?
Thank you. So the programs that are presently in place, as we've discussed for the sentenced population in particular, high-set programming, which is your high school equivalency programming. There is adult basic education. There are some vocational programs. There's the cane shop and the wood shop, and there is also substance abuse and mental health treatment programming. I'd like to have a little bit more information about what Mr. Kaling is talking about, because last that I understood in correctional facilities, because I continue to work in one, all pretrial individuals are classified as maximum, and the location that the sheriff is talking about is a medium security building. So I'm curious about how exactly that happens when we're talking about safety as well, having pretrial individuals housed in a medium security building. Perhaps that's a failure on my part, but my understanding was pretrial individuals were all maximum security. What is the ideal that I would like to implement? I would like to implement more technical and vocational training, and technical and vocational training that is aimed at adequate job placement post-release. And what I'm talking about there is jobs that will be accessible post-release and are CORI-friendly jobs. Remember, when you're talking about incarcerated individuals who are leaving, passing a CORI check for a lot of jobs is not going to be attainable. So there are certain jobs that are going to be out of the reach of individuals who have had a felony conviction or who have had some sort of incarceration history. So we need to be mindful of CORI-friendly jobs, and we need to be tracking towards that. So we're talking about jobs in manufacturing, jobs in building, which will be eminently available for the next many, many years with all of the infrastructure money that has been built into the national economy in the American Recovery Act. So we should be aiming towards things like a hoisting licensure. You can talk about 10-hour and 40-hour OSHA training. Get everybody in the facility CPR, AED, first aid trained. We have trainers on staff to do that. That is not a fiscal output on our part. That's a matter of reallocating the staff that we presently have to do that. If you, as an incarcerated individual, can walk out the door and have a hoisting certification, your 10-hour OSHA certification, your CPR, your AED card in hand, and walk into an employer and say, I am ready to go today, that gets you in the door to a good paying job, potentially with benefits for your family that allows you to put a roof over your head, food on the table, and allows you with a foot in the door to a job that could potentially lead to more advancement for you. That's where we need to be focusing our jobs. That's where we need to be focusing our training. That can be done a lot virtually nowadays. If we start to pivot, and like I talked about, technologically advancing the facility, we need to add Wi-Fi, we need to add tablets, we need to add more computer literacy classes, getting people online to do these trainings. A lot of these trainings are not difficult to do, and there is money in grants to be doing this, in skills grants that were just given out to other counties locally. Bristol County just got one, Hampden County just got one, skills grants. That puts the stuff, the things in place to be able to get certifications, to be able to get things. So that's computer software that you could be purchasing. That's licensing on computer software. That's trainers to be coming in to teach all of this. Again, they're not difficult classes. 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours. It gives you a certification that you can physically walk into an employer and say, I can do the work that you're asking to do, hire me. This is a job-friendly market. This is an employee-friendly market. There are jobs to be had if we train people for it. And there is a high demand for blue-collar jobs, and in some cases even white-collar jobs for individuals in CORI-friendly positions. But we need to be reallocating our resources more appropriately to fit what the community is going to be able to provide for the individuals released from the facility.
Thank you. For this next question, we're going to ask Ms. Peter to go first, Ms. Gittleson to go second, and Sheriff Kaling to go third. And the question is, and we have, again, there's some themes that are running throughout the questions, but I think that that's a good thing. So given a rise in mental health concerns as well as the drug use that often accompanies them, walks hand in hand with them, there are concerns that incarcerated individuals with mental health and substance abuse issues may not receive adequate support and treatment within the prison system as a whole. So what initiatives, if any, have you or would you support that address these concerns? What new initiatives do you think could be developed to support the rehabilitation of incarcerated individuals struggling with their mental health?
I think first and foremost, what needs to happen in the facility is the creation of its own mental health department. Like I said earlier, we contract out our services to ServiceNet. They are not providers within our facility. They are not on the state books. So the facility is binded to the contract rather than the employees servicing the needs of the facility. What we need is to expand the role of our mental health department. We need to get licensed clinicians in, and we need to get more of them so that there is more ability for the individuals in our care to be assessed, to be diagnosed, and then to be treated on-site, quickly, and thoroughly. That's where we need to start. That needs to start with recruiting and hiring licensed individuals. And I think we've heard up here too that recruiting and licensing and getting staff in general is going to be difficult. This will be no different. It will be hard to find licensed mental health clinicians, licensed clinical social workers, certified correctional healthcare providers like I am, but on the mental health side, to come into the facility. That's going to be difficult to do. Not impossible, but it will be difficult to do. Again, outreach into the communities. We have fantastic programs. How many colleges do we have in the area? We're the 5-college area. We should be tapping into those resources. You have master's degrees and PhD programs coming out of a lot of these schools. Tap into them. We have interns who come into the facility. Tap into them. You need to start continuing that contact with them post-internship, post-practicum placement. Need to start getting them into the facility. First and foremost, that's where we need to start the creation of our own department. Once we get that in place, then you can start to expand treatment options to more specific group treatment. If we have the staff, more specific one-on-one treatment. I don't think that's a bad idea if we can get the staff for it. The way the facility is presently, it's not an option. You have more than 50% of the facility with a diagnosed significant mental health disorder. You have one psychiatrist that comes to the facility every other week. You have a master of social work that does the day-to-day, Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week. Last I checked, mental health doesn't take weekends and holidays off. We need more staff, greater hours, expanded availability to the facility. We need to have staff that work for the facility, for the individuals in our care. We need to not be beholden to a contract to an outside facility. We need to have clinicians in the house that are providing services on the timetable that the individuals in our care need it on. Crises don't happen 9 to 5. Crises happen after a bad phone call at 10 o'clock. Crises happen after you get back from court or on Sunday before you're going to go to court. Things like that where we need to have providers. Yes, we have access to crisis services if there is a crisis, but more often than not, what we are relying on is critical incident trained security staff to manage the mental health crises. That's above and beyond what they should be doing. That is above and beyond their training. They do the very best they can with de-escalation techniques that they've learned, critical incident training management that they've learned. They are not an adequate replacement for a licensed mental health clinician. And what we need is to expand that role and to expand that access for the individuals in our care. It will only benefit them when we are talking about largely half of the population with a mental health disorder, and then again, another 80% total that have a substance abuse disorder. Combine those two, we're talking close to 50% of our population that has a co-occurring disorder that should be treated in an integrated fashion. We need to be doing that. First step, that's where we start.
Thank you. So this question next goes to Ms. Gittleson.
And Jackie, just so I make sure that I get all parts of the question, would you repeat it?
You bet.
Thanks.
So given a rise in mental health concerns as well as the drug use that often accompanies them, there are concerns that individuals with mental health and substance abuse issues may not receive adequate support and treatment within the prison system. What initiatives have you or would you support that address these concerns? What new initiatives do you think could be developed to support rehabilitation of incarcerated individuals struggling with their mental health?
Great, thank you very much. And so I do agree that there are a disproportionate number of folks in custody who deal with dual diagnoses, and usually it's the mental health, mental illness issue that causes substance abuse because they're self-medicating, so then we bring on a secondary problem, right? So we've got a substance abuse issue, but the real issue underneath it is the mental health issue. And how do you tackle both when they're both raging at the same time? So the answer is you do need to address both at the same time. You need counseling, you need actual therapy, not general groups where people feel either coerced or manipulated to participate in a certain way, but one-to-one actual therapy, specifically talk therapy in some form or another, whether that's CBT or DBT or some other modality, but some kind of real therapy. How do we do it? Given the fact that Hampshire County is blessed with a disproportionate number of clinicians and social workers, it would be wonderful if we could get them to come and apply at the Hampshire County Jail. But one of the first things we need to address is the fact that folks don't want to work there. And the fact that folks don't want to work there in general is a problem. And word has kind of gotten out about that. You know, if you look at online sites, people say things like run, don't walk in the other direction. You will not have a good experience there. So we need to take care of the staff, and we need to consider that one of the first things we need to do is we need to make the Hampshire County Jail a place where people want to work. And to come back to the formerly incarcerated individual who gave me some real insight on this and who reached out because he said, you are absolutely my choice for this position, and how can I support you? He said something that was really concerning to me. And he said, the fact that the staff does not support the current administration makes us unsafe. And for me, that was a mic drop moment. That he said, unfortunately, you know, because there is such a demoralized feeling among the staff, that because people don't want to work there, that because people are not attracted to want to make the changes that need to be made there, it means that we're not going to get the quality folks that we need to try to bring to the facility. We also need to address the mental health issues of the staff themselves. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about substance abuse among the staff. Nobody's talking about anxiety, right? Hypervigilance, right? Depression, and the kinds of things that we don't talk about. We need to start talking about those things and checking in with one another. Are you okay? A few years ago, we lost a staff member who took his own life, and that hit a lot of folks really hard. What was shocking to me was that we had a day of grief counselors who came in after the fact, and then after that, nothing. We never talked about it again. It's like it never happened. So we've got some bigger problems to deal with, and the fact that most folks don't find it an attractive place to want to stay, whether that's veteran staff leaving or new staff who don't want to apply, to me, that's a major challenge for both the folks in custody and the folks who work there.
Thank you. Sheriff Kayleen?
Well, I found something she said very offensive because the individual that you were describing was somebody that I cared about, and everybody else cared about him also. Mm-hmm. And you may not have known the whole history, and I would beg to differ that the people who did come in that situation came in not only for one day, but they spent months later working with staff privately, because that's what you do in a mental health situation. You respect the people that are involved. You don't put them out in the front and create this problem for everybody there. Yes, there are mental health issues in jails. There are mental health issues in our society. If anybody who knows anything about mental health, it is I. I have been there for a long time, and I have dealt with a lot of mental health issues. I spent 2 hours one day walking a quad area inside the facility, just trying to calm somebody down. 2 hours. And everybody said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because it's the right thing to do." I will not push away from the right thing to do. I never have. Now, let's go back to a couple of these situations that we talk about. We have 7 staff that are licensed, that you may not be aware of what their licenses are. I have also hired a psychologist part-time, and the psychologist that's working part-time is working with the newer, younger staff, and we have a game plan for working with the treatment staff and the medical staff, and moving from the treatment and medical staff, we're taking them, and then we're going to work with the security staff on mental health issues, because we understand it and we respect that people have problems. But to say that we're not doing anything is wrong, and you both know that. You both know that. The contract services that we have with ServiceNet is an overreaching contract because our population do not stay with us that long. And they have to have a wraparound service when they get out into the community. Because if they don't get those wraparound services, I will guarantee you, if you were looking for services today in this community for mental illness, you would be waiting 3 to 6 months, depending on what the circumstances were, to get those services in the community. We have a connection because we contract services with ServiceNet. And ServiceNet is in our community, and they work hand in hand with, as we move our people back into the community in these short periods of time. And I will stick with that kind of a process. And the individual psychologist that I hired was an individual who had 35 years of experience working with the court system and helping people with mental health issues get ready for court. And we have taken that individual, and he is doing very specific training with our staff, and will continue to do that over this next 2 years. So please, don't think that we do not do anything for the mentally ill, because I do care about people. That's why I entered into this profession to begin with, was because I care about people. Thank you.
Thank you. So for this next question, we're going to ask Sheriff Kaling to go first, and then Ms. Cepeda, and then Ms. Gittleson. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to think back to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're apparently still in. So thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes in policy and practices at the Hampshire County Sheriff's Office and its peer facilities across the state, what did you learn through this experience? What would you have done differently in the response if you had known, hindsight's 2020? So what would you have done differently in response to the pandemic? And then we'd like to hear some examples based on what you've learned in your own work over this period of time, and how, if you are elected, what steps would you take to better prepare for the next pandemic?
Well, there's a next pandemic sitting out there right now with monkeypox, and we're already preparing for that. We have had discussions among our some of the senior staff along with the medical staff to ensure that we continue the process of examination, making sure that people that are coming into the facility are in the best health that they can be once they're coming in. Understand one thing, that the people that come into our facilities, in most cases, have not been to doctors, have not been to dentists. And so we have to work with them at whatever their base is. And so when we start to look at what is the next pandemic, we looked at, I think one of the best things that we did, and we have done it for monkeypox as well, the 14 sheriffs in the Commonwealth got together and we said, we're going to hire an epidemiologist. And we hired an epidemiologist to work specifically on COVID, and we have contracted those services to continue those services going forward with monkeypox. I have learned from the process that making sure that the outside community understands what's going on, and I did put out pretty much every 2 weeks exactly what our status was, because I didn't want the outside community to panic that we had a spike or we had no spike, but the communication had to be there. So every 2 weeks we were sending out information to the local press, who in most cases did not publish it, to our legislative delegation, and we posted it on our webpage so that people on the outside community could understand that in these crisis times, we were being open and transparent as to what was happening inside the facility and how we were controlling the situation. I think we did the best job as far as moving people and keeping people in smaller areas for longer periods of time so that we could keep them safe. And I think if we had some sort of another exposure, we would use that same practice because it worked. And we maintained a relatively healthy population throughout the last 3 years, and I'm hoping to, continue to do that over the next 6 years. We've also, and part of this will work into, we've applied for a grant for substance abuse and mental health issues through SAMHSA, and it's a $750,000 grant, and that's going to give us, hopefully we will get it, but it gives us a very solid step in doing more and more wraparound services. Because people are with us for such short periods of time, we have to have wraparound services out in the community. If we do that, we fail, and we realized at the beginning of COVID that some of the individuals that were being just released through the court system were overdosing and dying, and that happened. And I call that attention to people in the right set of circumstances. That there are some people that have no services are going to have a problem if we continue the practice. And I think the courts listened to us and they adjusted some of those practices. And we will continue in the process if there's another outbreak of some sort. It was the communication between the defense bar, the district attorney's office, the courts, and the sheriff's office through an effort through senior staff to work together with that group to make sure that we ended up keeping everybody safe.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question one more time before I answer?
Absolutely. So thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic and changes to policy and practices at the Hampshire Sheriff's Office and its peer facilities across the state, what did you learn from that experience? What would you have done differently in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, imagining if you were there? And then base examples on what you've learned through your work in the last 2.5 years. And if elected, what steps would you take now to prepare for the next pandemic?
So I was there. I was the nurse. I was there 40 plus hours a week from minute 1 until the day I left. I was in the units with the COVID positive individuals doing chest percussions in full PPE when we barely had PPE. I was in the units doing vital signs around the clock, extra hours, keeping the staff safe. I was there doing COVID swabs. I was there doing vaccines when we got them. I was the staff. I lived it. I was front line. That was what I did. What would I have done differently if I had been in charge? I would have followed the CDC guidelines to a T. I would not have had COVID symptomatic patients. I would not have had COVID symptomatic staff who were pending test results come to the facility and report for work only to be sent home afterwards. I would not have done that. I would have used different housing units to open up a care facility that was better ventilated than what we had. We used the regional lockup facility, which has no windows. Again, hindsight 2020, I get all of that. I would have included ventilation as part of the plan and better fresh air ventilation. COVID hit us in April of 2020. Could have had the windows open. We know now that would have helped. And I think generally understanding disease and epidemiology and disease management, we know that that would have been a good idea. When the vaccinations became available to our facility, there was a fair bit of an uproar in the community, maybe not this community, but the community as a whole, that we were going to vaccinate incarcerated individuals first, and we were going to be frontline staff vaccinating first. The sheriff very rightly got behind that and was very positive towards the staff about getting vaccinated, and it was very positive and encouraging for the staff to get vaccinated. Our first allotment of shots was 100 shots. That's 50 individuals that we could have vaccinated. If I were in charge, I would have ensured that my frontline staff was vaccinated before non-frontline staff. I speak to that as the person giving the vaccines. When I am frontline staff and I am giving vaccines to people who are not frontline staff before I have had my own, that is a problem. As the sheriff, I appreciate he took the first vaccine. If I were sheriff, I would have taken the last. I would have seen that my staff who were doing the frontline work, the sheriff was not doing the frontline work. Our nurses were, our staff in the booking areas were, our staff who were at civil process were, our staff in the accepting areas, those are your frontline staff. I would have ensured that they had taken the shot before me. What would I do in the future going forward? I created a disorder management plan for this. In 2018, I received disaster management training from MEMA and FEMA. The training department was well aware I had that training. I offered my services. It wasn't accepted. We need to have a disorder management plan. We had a number of directives that we used as the course of the pandemic went through the facility. Those directives are only good for a short period of time, and then they need to be reevaluated as standards change. You need to have an overarching policy and disorder management plan when something like this happens, to deal with staffing, to deal with housing, to deal with resource management. I would have been more accurate about our reporting. Yes, the sheriff reported a lot on Facebook. We didn't hear a whole lot about staffing in those reports. We heard a lot about who inmate-wise or individual in the facility-wise had COVID. We didn't talk about all the staff that had COVID, because the second they got COVID, a little bit later in the pandemic, we sent them home. We had a lot of staff that were out with COVID. Yes, we didn't have COVID in the facility and the individuals in our care very much, but we did have a lot of staff. So it's not entirely accurate that there were no COVID in the building. We had a lot of staff that were out. I would have also been more present at the facility. I worked the entirety of our first outbreak the month of April in 2020, 3 to 11, Monday through Friday, and a lot of weekends too. Not a single time did I see the sheriff. I would have been present for my staff. They needed that. The staff needed to know that I was there and that I would have said thank you for their hard work. It was a tough time.
Thank you. Ms. Gittleson?
Yes. So we learned a lot in COVID, didn't we? And we learned what to do. We learned what not to do. One of the things that I think I would do differently is I would pay very, very close attention immediately to the CDC. And when the CDC was telling us early on in March, stay home, that's exactly what I did do. And in fact, I used my own sick time in order to do that. Because what I saw still going on in the office that I occupied, I saw pretrial individuals who were coming in directly off the street who had not been tested yet as the pandemic was beginning to rage, who were still coming in and walking past my door 6 times a day. And I knew that they hadn't been tested. I knew that they had not been screened for COVID, and I had some grave concerns about this. So when the CDC says stay home, I listened. And I think that that's the strategy I would take again should there be another similar type of pandemic. I think that we are much better presented, we are much better prepared at this point to be able to have the gear that we need to have. We are much better stocked in terms of masks. We've got hand sanitizer now. We've learned a lot of different strategies. We've got more PPE. But if we have another pandemic, we might have the same sorts of experiences in terms of shortages of some sort of material that we have not anticipated just yet. I listen to doctors. I believe in science. That's what I would do, certainly. I would also make sure that people who were in a situation, as they were in the jail, who were in lockdown, people in custody, that they would have something to occupy themselves while they were in custody. And that was a problem. There was a lot of time on their hands that they spent doing absolutely nothing. And while I was there as the education program director, the Department of Education was reaching out to me saying, what's going on with your teachers? What are your teachers doing from home? Why can't they provide virtual experiences to the people who are still inside, sitting there just waiting. And that's because we were behind the 8 ball in terms of technology. The facility had never been wired, it was not up to date. It wasn't a question of us not being able to, get a signal out. The question was whether or not students inside the facility could receive what we were teaching. So we were at home. The Department of Education was saying, are your teachers getting any professional development while they're sent home? So one of the things that we did do, non-essential staff were sent home. One of the things I would do in the future is I would look at the overall staffing and the facilities management, and I would see if permanently there aren't some individuals who can do some of their jobs from home so that we consistently have a better ventilated facility. One of the things I've seen is that we have a number of individuals who've experienced symptoms of sick building syndrome. And we saw a lot of that as the mods were being rehabilitated. Every time they pulled up flooring, they found mold, for example. So we had a lot of problems with that. So one of the things I would do is I would send any staff who can do their jobs from home. I think we would figure out some work from home strategies for some staff who can do that permanently, right? So that's one of the things that we learned.
Thank you. I'm going to pause for a second. It is now 8:30, which means we have half an hour left till we officially end. I have a couple more questions. I also want to let everyone have 4-minute closing remarks at the end. I want to pause and see if there's anything that anyone wants to have a 2-minute rebuttal to clarify points of anything that's been asked so far. So why don't you all take a second to think about whether, although Sheriff Kaling, I see you raising your hand, so take a few minutes, go through your notes, see if there's, not minutes, because we don't have minutes, but let's set this up so that if there's something that folks want to do a 2-minute clarification of, let's allow that to happen, and then we'll ask our final question and then do closing remarks. And because you raised your hand first, Sheriff Kaling, I will allow you to go first. So 2 minutes on the clock, Evan.
I would like to just address this last question. Maybe I was missing someplace, but I'm shocked that somebody would say that I wasn't in the facility. I was in the facility day and night, and even on the overnights, and you can check that. I spent the weekends coming in and checking with medical directors at the time to make sure that everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. I gave up my time because my position as sheriff is 24/7, 365 days a year. So when you say that, you may not have seen me, but I was there. And to the point of people passing by your door that were in some unhealthy condition, I would disagree with you on that because the medical department had very specific directions on screening people when they came in. And so, and during COVID, there was not movement between the units. We shut down the movement between the units, and there was very limited movement. The only group that would be moving would be those people going to work assignments. And those people were people who had been in the facility a long period of time, much longer than the 14-day quarantine period. So I just want to make sure that people don't think that we just took for granted that there was very little being done for the people that were in our care, because we did take care of those people.
Thank you. Ms. Gittleson?
I do have a response to that, which is that the initial response to the COVID outbreak was slow to react. Other facilities had sent non-essential folks home weeks before the Hampshire County non-essential folks were sent home. So when I say that folks coming in from the outside who had been freshly arrested and booked were passing by my door 6 times a day, and they had not at that point been tested, it's because we didn't have the tests. We didn't have the ability to know what we were dealing with at that point. Other facilities had sent their folks home weeks before, and we were waiting for the directive. And some of us took it upon ourselves, and because the Department of Education reached out to most of its education programs, they said directly to us, you folks need to go home. You need to leave the facility, because that's what's happening elsewhere around the state. So there was not an immediate response, and there was a slow reaction time that I would argue with.
Do you want to have, I mean, and it can be really on any point, not necessarily.
No, just 30 seconds to this.
Okay.
I have no doubt that the sheriff was in the facility. I'm just saying my experience was that I never saw him during the period of COVID that we were there. I worked there a lot of hours every week, and I did not see him. I have no doubt that he was there. Like you said, he discussed with the medical director. I was not the medical director. I was your line staff. Your line staff are the people doing the day-to-day work, caring for the individuals that are there, COVID or not COVID. What those staff need and what those staff want is an acknowledgement of their work. I think that's a lot of what we're both saying up here, is that there needs to be an acknowledgement of that work. I appreciate the sheriff was in close contact with the medical director and the facility physician. I appreciate that, but I would have appreciated a thank you personally more, as would have the sergeants, the lieutenants, and the officers that I was working with, knee-deep, covered in PPE, 8 hours a day in the COVID unit. We would have appreciated a thank you too.
Okay. We're going to move away from COVID for a bit, which it would be really nice if the whole world could move away from COVID. I cannot make that happen. I wish I could. So this next question I'm going to ask Ms. Gittleson first, and then Sheriff Kaline, and then Ms. Cepeda. So considering the budgetary oversight entrusted to the sheriff, how have you demonstrated a willingness and aptitude for transparent fiscal management as a candidate in complying with campaign rules and reporting to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance? In what ways do you believe the Hampshire Sheriff's Office can better utilize and leverage existing funding to support the growth of new programs and those that are currently under development? And I can always repeat any of that if you want me to.
Okay. So I see 2 different parts of that question. One has to do with campaign finance, which, honestly concerns me quite a bit less than the actual facility transparency when it comes to budgetary matters. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it's a steep learning curve to deal with the office, with the OCPF. They are quite vigilant about making sure that we are filing our reports on a regular basis, so there's no question that there's quite a bit of transparency going on there. I will say that I have made it a point to say that I will not accept campaign contributions from jail staff. I don't want to be beholden to anybody who I might be overseeing at any point. I just think it's bad optics. I understand Mr. Kaline's response that it's a person's freedom of speech to support whomever they want. I just think it doesn't look right when you've got an employee who's contributing to the boss's campaign for re-election. So I have said point blank, I will not take any campaign contributions from anyone who works at the staff or is likely to work at the staff. Thankfully, I don't have any relatives, I don't have any friends who need jobs at the jail, so I'm good on that. I don't need to pay back any favors. When it comes to transparency with regard to the Hampshire County Jail's budget itself, I believe in full transparency. One of the first things I will do is I will overhaul the website of the Hampshire Sheriff's Office, which is really a trip down fictional lane. When I just look at the education offerings and I see 20-something courses that haven't been offered in a decade, I don't even know what to make of that site half the time. So one of the things I will do is revise the HSO website immediately. Frankly, I love the one of the Northampton PD. I think it's lively. I think it's modern. I think it's responsive. And among the things I will do is we will publish our own sources of revenue and our own expenditures on a regular basis. I don't think a citizen should have to go digging through the see-through system, whether that's payroll or the general see-through budget system for mass.gov, which can be a maze. I don't think the average citizen is going to do that. So when we say something like, well, we have full transparency and we're an open book, no, the average citizen doesn't know what to ask. And we shouldn't expect them to know what to ask. I think it's my job as sheriff to tell you what I'm spending tax dollars on. I think you have a right to know that. I think you have a right to know who's making what kind of salaries. Most recently, I was surprised to find out that just in June, yet another consultant was on the payroll to the tune of $8,400. And when I take a look and I hear someone like Mr. Kaelane say, well, I've got 40-something years of experience, then my question is, how many consultants do we need? Because we've got some who've been on the payroll for many years now. And I don't understand that. So when I talk about transparency, it starts with the budget, but it really is about transparency and accountability in all that we do. One of the things I plan to do is invite a citizens advisory board with members from each of the towns. I want to hear from all the communities, the 20 different towns and cities of Hampshire County. I want to know what they need from their sheriff's office. And I want them to call me on the carpet if they need to call me on the carpet and hold me and my staff accountable. So I have nothing to hide. I'm coming here, none of this baggage is mine. I will be coming with a fresh perspective. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm an open book. I'll pull back the curtains, ask me anything.
Sheriff Kaelane.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you would be an open book. I am an open book, and if you look at our budgets are based on what the legislature decides to give us, and that's usually a percentage increase each year. You have to fight for every penny that you get, and we do that. The issue of contractors, sometimes you find people that are quality people who have worked in systems and have worked hard in other systems that can benefit you, and you don't have to pay them benefits, so therefore it costs less in the budget, and so therefore you don't have to pay them all of the pieces that you would pay a regular employee. That is a financial good practice in many cases, depending on what the circumstances are. One of the things that we did when I took over was as people retired, and I will continue to do this, as people retired, I will look at what the circumstances were, what their job description was, and how do we make that work differently. It may be a situation where one of the things that we have done is we have taken the rank of captain, and we have made them do different skill sets across the board, and become partners and work with each other part of the operation, whether it be the medical department, education, treatment, and so by having captains in a balanced position to work together, we do much better, because then when there's an on-call person, they know all of the other pieces. That's the idea behind spreading out the department and making it work right. As far as the website is concerned, the website needs to be updated, and we were working to wait until we got into a new budget year, because the money is very limited. Roughly 5 to 10% would be almost considered expenses that we can push outside of what would be normal expenses between our medical costs, our food costs, and our staffing costs. You're working with roughly 10% of your budget that you may end up being able to use for different things. And it just so happens that the project this year is revamping the website. And it takes time to do these things. You don't just snap your fingers. It would be great if the sheriff had the power to just snap their fingers and say, okay, we're going to get this done and it's going to get done today. That isn't how budgets work. It's not how the state works, and it's not how the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has ever worked. As a matter of fact, if you take a look, the state budget was a month and a half late, right? Or a month late this year. And some of the pieces of the budget are still being signed off on or being kicked back by the governor as we speak tonight. So when you think of these things, you have to understand that nothing happens quickly because the money comes from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I don't have this pot of gold that I can just reach into and say, here's the money for these things. Let's go spend it on one thing or another. We have to make rational choices. And the inmate population on the correction side is one of the important pieces. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Ms. Cepeda, to finish, and then it looked like there might be some calls for extra time.
I think I'm going to answer that question backwards to forwards and address a little bit of what Sheriff Kaling had talked about, and Ms. Gittleson as well. The website is certainly an issue. It is 10 plus years old in terms of updating. The facility has 3 IT professionals, more than other comparably sized facilities. Those 3 individuals collect salaries of up over $270,000. There is opportunity for those individuals to be working on updating a website. We're all here running a campaign. We all have websites. I personally designed my own website. I'm not an IT professional. Imagine what a professional can do. It's not that difficult, it's not that hard, but it does require an allocation of time and an individual who knows what they're doing. The facility has 3 IT professionals. I suspect one of them could probably be tasked, at least part-time, with a website update. My website launched in February and was up and running a few months after I started working on it. It's not like I'm asking someone to take 6 years to do this like the sheriff has had to do this. It's great that this is going to be the budget allocation this year, but there's been 6 years worth of opportunity to do this. It's not difficult. It needs to be a priority, though. That's all. When we talk about the budget and where we're allocating resources and funds, contract providers are certainly an issue. If you look at the final year of Sheriff Garvey's administration, contract providers accounted for less than $500,000 of the budget. In the first full year of Sheriff Kaling's budget, that was up over $1 million. We've created positions in this administration that didn't previously exist, department heads and job titles that didn't previously exist, and we've allocated resources and funds and budget and salary to individuals who have come in from another facility or another area for a particular position, and shortly after they've begun that job and that position, they've been elevated and promoted and given significant job raises in certain cases to take on responsibilities outside of the initial job that they were hired for and outside of the training and criteria that they personally obtained. The licensure which they do or do not have. They are now supervising things that they were not required to or hired to shortly after that. When we talk about how this translate with our campaign finance and everybody being an open book and all of that kind of thing, I think we're all on the same page that we're all an open book, that sort of thing. I'm also the only candidate who hasn't been audited by the OCPF, who hasn't been sent to legal for any of their campaign finance issues, who hasn't been required to give back any donations that they've received during either this tenure or a previous with OCPF. Yes, I have donations from staff, present staff right now to this facility that are donating to my campaign. I do not oversee anyone. When I become sheriff, if I'm likely to become sheriff, we can cross that bridge when we get there about optics. For right now, those staff have incredibly little power in all of this. One of the only things that they have to speak with are their dollars. And there are several that are in favor of my campaign and are speaking in one of the only ways that they can. It's with dollars. Another way is with passing out literature of mine. Another way is with lawn signs of mine. They have very little options. Who am I to tell them no? They have a voice that they'd like to speak with. I'm not about to silence them. If this is their choice, they certainly can. Thank you.
Okay, so I did see that some folks were looking like they wanted to do another minute or two on that question. I want to make sure that we have 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that we wrap up. Actually, we have 12 minutes left. I don't want to take time away from closing arguments. What if we do one minute rebuttals, and we'll see how that goes? And I think, Ms. Gittleson, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, there's a reason that I focused on transparency as the number one pillar of my campaign, which is that I believe that there hasn't been any. And I think that the average citizen in Hampshire County has no idea what has been going on in the Hampshire Sheriff's Office for a very long time. And that's the reason that I wanted to make it number one, that I was going to take a look at. So with regard to the websites, I'm going to join what Ms. Cepeda said. We each got our websites up in no time. This is not a difficult thing to do. It just hasn't been a priority for this administration. I do want to add to the question of positions that have been created. There's no transparency there either. And 3 positions were created right off the bat and handed to people who were acquaintances of the sheriff. These positions were never posted. These positions were never advertised to anyone inside the facility or outside the facility. That is not transparency. And when it comes to transparency, I think anyone who is applying for a state position, which they pay well and they have good benefits, I think everybody in Hampshire County has a right to know what those positions are and apply for them.
Would you like to go next, Sheriff Kaling?
Just on the point of contracts. Contracts are not employees as you would view an employee. And contractors bring a skill set to the table. And contractors that I brought in were quality people who had a total history of how we do corrections in Massachusetts. And they were able to work with me and work with the rest of the staff on moving things forward. So this idea that I took all of this money and spent it foolishly is not factual. As a matter of fact, I reduced some of the payroll at the higher end. If you wanted to go back and check, you would see that some of the higher end employees that retired were not replaced.
Thank you. Do you want your one more minute? And
Yeah.
then we'll do closing.
I didn't say any of the money allocations were foolish. It was just a point out that there was a different set of priorities with the prior administration and quite quickly a different set with yours. And a lot of that upper executive administration salary that has been lost, like you mentioned with the captains, at the previous or at the recent retirement of the previous major, he wasn't replaced. So now we have essentially a parliamentary system with all of our captains as opposed to a singular person in the position of major now making decisions. That muddies the waters when it comes to the organization of the facility and the chain of command. Who answers to who and who ultimately is holding kind of the responsibility for all things. When you now have essentially this tribunal at the top where you have 6 voices all trying to get their heads together around what the decision is versus a singular person responsible for the response, it becomes more difficult. So yes, you've gotten better maybe with salary, but the organization is less.
Thank you. So that's the end of our formal questions. Thank you all for sticking it out with us for so long. I know this is a long forum. I think it's been very educational and helpful. I want to make sure that everyone has time for their closing remarks, so I'm going to actually go in the reverse of the opening remarks. So that means, Ms. Gittleson, you get to do your remarks first, and we will go over by a couple minutes. Sorry.
Thank you. So in addition to some of the measures that I've already addressed, I will also meet regularly with those in custody for open communication. I will give input where possible. Just because they get to be heard doesn't mean they get to decide, but I will certainly listen so that they feel heard as well. I will invite the community in for transparency. I mentioned a Citizens Advisory Board. I'm very serious about that. I want to include more communities throughout Hampshire County in what the Sheriff's Office is about because nobody knows. When I was out collecting signatures and I said, "Do you know who the sheriff is?" We didn't even hit the 13%. according to the ACLU, by the tables that I was at. Nobody could name who the sheriff is, what the sheriff's office does, what the sheriff's position is responsible for, and that needs to change. So specific programs I want to work on, in addition to one-to-one counseling and therapy, I want to have therapy groups that have printed curricula with identified outcomes. I do want to bring a virtual CDL program to the facility, and that would involve a simulator for learning the trade. Truck driving pays family-sustaining wages. It's Corey-friendly. It's something that people in custody are very interested in doing. I want to collaborate with Smith Voc, which is right down the road. They have many different workshops that would be wonderful for our folks in custody to be able to access, and I don't understand why that's never happened. My flagship program is a partnership with the UMass Prison Education Initiative. I've already reached out to the members of the UMass Prison Education Initiative, and we have plans to bring a virtual college program and make the Hampshire County Jail the home base for a statewide virtual college program for folks in custody. We know that education reduces recidivism. We know that education with vocational training reduces it even further, and we know that higher education reduces recidivism down to the single digits. I think Hampshire County, home of UMass Amherst, flagship campus of the system, needs to also be the flagship correctional education of Massachusetts, and I'm clearly the qualified person to bring that here. I also want to bring a shelter dog training program to the facility. I know that's going to reduce everybody's stress levels, both folks in custody and folks on staff. It's also a great way to give back to the community. Everybody likes dogs. Everybody in custody needs something else to focus on, right? So yes, I would invite Evan and his friend to be our demo dog and handler. I believe in community presence at all kinds of Hampshire Sheriff presence at all kinds of community events. I also believe that no income should be generated for the facility from people in custody. No income generated from phones, no income generated from commissary. I don't think that that's a source of revenue for the facility. The sheriff did talk about the allocation. Why is the Hampshire Sheriff's allocation the lowest of all county facilities except for Dukes and Nantucket? Similarly sized facilities like Berkshire, Franklin, and Barnstable have much more funding than the Hampshire Sheriff's Office does. I'd like to know why we were unable to bring that money home. And I think that we could, with some different programming and some different personnel in the big chair. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Ms. Cepeda, you're up next.
I just want to thank you, Jackie, for having us here tonight and the rest of the members of the Easthampton Democratic City Committee. I appreciate you having everybody here tonight. Again, I've spent 10 years in corrections as a line staff member. I've spent 10 years, nearly 10 years in this facility developing trust and relationships with the staff there, trust and relationships with the individuals incarcerated there. For a nurse like me, this becomes a long-term care facility as well as an acute care facility. There are a number of guys there that I've been taking care of for years and years and years. You develop a relationship with them and they begin to trust you. And in corrections, anybody who works in corrections, anybody who works in law enforcement can tell you your word is the only thing you have. That's the only thing you have. You have to stand behind that. The staff there know that I stand behind my word. The individuals there know that I stand behind my word, and I've spent a really long time working at that. Nurses are great communicators. Nurses are great advocates. What I'm trying to do in this role is expand the definition of patient from that singular person that I've been caring for in sick call or at a health history that I've been doing, and expand that definition to include the facility. The facility now becomes my patient. Every part of that facility becomes the one that I am advocating for, the one that I am out in the legislature talking to and about, the one that I am in the community talking to and about. We're trying to get resource allocation and funding. We're trying to get people into our community people in from our community to work, to recruit with us, to do partnerships with us. We need volunteers in the facility to fill in the gaps where we don't have funding, but we have need. I'm the one who's advocating out there for my patient. This is what nurses do every day. We come into the facility, we roll up our sleeves, and we say, I'm gonna take care of this. I see that you have a problem, I see that you have a need, I know how to address it, and if I don't, I sure as heck am gonna go find out who can, because I can ask the question, and I can find the information out, and I can fix it. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to say, I don't know that, teach me. I'm not afraid of that. Nurses are lifelong educators and learners and students. I believe in science, I believe in evidence, and we're going to bring that into the facility, and we're going to continue forward on the path of evolution that corrections is taking, which is addressing our substance abuse issues, our mental health issues. We're going to modernize our technology to become a 21st century facility so that we can better serve the clients, we can recruit better staff, younger staff, hungry staff. We want them in with us. This is what I will do in this position.
Thank you. Sheriff Kaline?
Yes, I have told you some of the things that we have done in the last 6 years. And we've done quite a bit. What you have to understand is this is not a one-dimensional system. And it is not just a jail and house of correction. The sheriff's responsibility is much more than that. And you have to look at all of the different divisions, and you have to look at how that intersects with the general public and how it intersects with the individuals that we care for. I look at the mental health, I look at substance abuse as part of an ongoing process. Because the individuals are with us for such a short period of time, we have to make sure that our outside wraparound services happen as much as possible. So some of the things that we've been doing, and we're going to continue to work on it, is the grant narrative that we have at the present time. It's a $750,000 grant if we get it. No guarantees in the world of the federal government in one way or the other. But over the 5 years, we can use that as a blueprint. And that blueprint will give us options for how we do community wraparound services, how we give services to individuals who leave us by having case managers in the community. Because corrections, and I've been in corrections for a long time, I've been teaching corrections. Corrections is moving into the community. It's not staying behind bricks and mortar. And one of the things that I heard early on from one of the candidates was that they wanted to rebuild a building. That's not what corrections is going to be 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. What's going to happen is we're going to see more and more people living in community settings with electronic monitors, with supervision, with medical treatment, with mental health treatment, and with substance abuse treatment. That's what's going to happen. So that is the way I look at this situation. We're going to implement more community corrections programming. We're going to continue moving it in that direction. I am going to continue to work with the LGBTQI initiative that was started just before COVID, because it's important to my community in Hampshire County, and it's also important to us as a state to protect those rights that everybody should have. I want to find a good location for a second Bridge to the Future project in Hampshire County, but not in the Northampton area, because we have a Bridge to the Future in Northampton. And I want to continue our Triad program. The Triad program works with seniors. We're almost ready to open up our drop-in center at the Hampshire Mall. And at that point in time, there'll be a place for seniors to come. They'll be able to collect medical equipment, and they will also have some other services that will be given between our Triad folks and the DA's office and the local police department in Hadley. We want to continue to build our therapeutic model of corrections. I am going to keep pushing that. And I want to continue the positive relationship that I've built with our legislative delegation, because they are important to us in what we do and how we do it. So, I am Patrick Kaling. I'm the Sheriff of Hampshire County, and I have the education, training, and certification to run the Hampshire Sheriff's Department. I'm the only person in this race who has run an agency with over 150 people and conformed to the rules of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our forum. I want to thank the candidates for coming tonight and being here and being open and responding to our questions. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank members of our committee who put some time to put this together, and Easthampton Media, obviously, for broadcasting this tonight. Again, it will be available, you can find it through their website and their Facebook page up through September 6th primary election. Don't forget to vote. Vote Democrat for everything. Just vote. And don't forget to vote. Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie.